Reporting from NBC News reminds us who's really at the heart of the Epstein story: the women who were victims of Jeffrey Epstein's ongoing sexual abuse. 4 women explained how the Trump administration's handling of Epstein's case is only adding to their anguish. They say the administration should be pushing to expose anyone and everyone who was involved, instead of pumping the brakes on prosecutions. 38-year-old Danielle Bensky, who was abused by Epstein 2 decades ago, said, quote, "You never really heal. And with what's happening now, it feels like we're being erased. All the brave women who came forward, all the work that we did to tell the world what happened to us, it's all being erased." Maya Wiley and Basil Smikle are still here at the table with us. Maya, from your perspective, what do you imagine this entire cycle, this entire discussion, the fallout from the conspiracy theorizing around this to even the legal developments of the last few days? What do you imagine it has been like for the victims to see this play out in the public square without them most of the time being at the center of the story?
Well, traumatizing. And I think some have already said it's traumatizing. First of all, it's traumatizing to have the story out there and have it not be about justice for them, not be about how do we prevent this from happening to other girls and young women and older
about
women
political
of any
points.
And instead, it is a complete erasure. That's one of the things they've said, and they're right. There's no discussion about what happened to them and by whom. And that is, I think, on the one side of this story that's really not enough. The story is, it's not about the deep state. It's about powerful people who get away with hurting people who are less powerful. And that is so often women. And it is so often girls, and it is so often around sexual exploitation. You know, even what we're seeing in immigration, these mass deportations, we're not thinking enough about how it's making young women and girls subject to sexual trafficking, the way in which people are being detained, some of the things that can happen in detention centers, some of the things we know happens there, and some of the things that happens when you just send an young 18-year-old back across the border without any idea what's going to happen to her. I mean, we're making these decisions all the time as a country to pay attention not to the people who are most victimized. And every single one of these women were exceptionally brave because we are talking about powerful people. We know for a fact that Jeffrey Epstein got away with it once. Imagine if he didn't have the help he got from someone who was a former Trump appointee in helping that case that originated in Miami, that became, it was the Miami Herald doing deep reporting, remember, that brought back to the light of day the need to bring prosecution against Jeffrey Epstein many years later. When we remember what we were hearing about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, when we remember the stories, when we know how long and how hard and how devastating it was for these women to make this happen, to put themselves out there in the public eye. One woman is already pulling herself back, not trying not to be identified.
Right.
It is because it is horrible.
And
it is violence, and it is bad.
And they're afraid of the retribution that might come their way if they do put their names out there. And we've seen when they do go after individuals in this society, whether it's election workers or what have you, how dangerous that can be. I'm wondering, though, and this is what we were kind of talking about a little bit in the break, the question that surrounds the perpetrators of these crimes, right? Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell are accused. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison serving time for providing and engaging in the trafficking of these young women and children to men to engage in criminal conduct by having sex with these children. Those names are not out there.
Right.
Those people have not been brought to the public to face account for what they have done. And I think most people who follow this case, yes, you can strip away the politics of it and the conspiracy theories. That is a central question that has not been answered. Where are the names of the people who were engaged in the sexual conduct with these children, these minors, these women? Why have they not, any administration, Biden administration, Trump administration, Trump 2.0, why have they not pursued getting those people and bringing them to justice as well?
Well, you know, when I think about, in answering that question, I actually think about the Bernie Sanders oligarchical tour, because we talk about it mostly in terms of economics, but it's more than that. It's also about power. It's also about influence. And to answer your question, I mean, that's really the problem here, that there are people in positions of power that find a way to make things go away, to lessen their sentence, to make things, and maybe in some cases, people, disappear and silence them. So to your point, when folks were talking about this over the last couple of years and realizing that there were people in positions of power that not only could find a way to make some of this information go away, but you see a picture between Epstein and a former president, and then you elect him to the presidency. What does that do? It's not just about electing the man, it's about erasing a movement. Because you put that person in a position of power, he is going to appoint other people to make things go away, so that you have this sort of staged event where you bring influencers to the White House and say, look, here's all the information, now go run with it, and they have nothing to run with until, oh, there's more information here. Oh, it's starting to get deeper. The concern I have, again, is the way this information gets used. Because, and I heard this reporting on this network earlier, that the folks who are influencers on the right will use this for their purposes, which we could speculate as to what that is. But is it really to get to the heart of justice? Is it really to find a way to protect not just the women who are involved and the girls who are involved, but any future women and girls who would be victims? We don't know that. And that's my concern, that yes, we may get to the bottom of this. Yes, some names may come out, but there are a lot of people that had an inkling that this president might be involved in Epstein and elected him anyway.
Yeah.
And that's the concern. How do we stop that from happening?
Well, put Epstein aside. 26 women.
Right.
It had nothing to do with the Epstein case. Were already publicly.
I think it's kind of says it all in this country that, like, and I do not mean this as some feminist defense of Ghislaine Maxwell, by the way, but just that the only person being held accountable is a woman who was involved in this whole thing, when it is a network of men who committed the most violent and heinous parts of these crimes, allegedly. That is the one.
One might ask. One might ask, why wasn't she trying to make a deal? She had every opportunity to try to make a deal for herself by pointing out, I mean, I don't know that she didn't offer it. None of us can know, but the likelihood that she made that kind of deal is low based on the fact that we didn't see other investigations and prosecutions. And this was one that was such a large case. I mean, one thing just to understand is the size, the number of victims, the number of places because of the different properties, including 2 private islands, the time period, took a lot of federal investigation. Let me just say that. But I don't know. I mean, she had every opportunity. So the only thing I'll say is she had every opportunity to try to offer some up.
We got to
just your term network implies money, resources, people. Bigger than one person or individual.